But the challenge for subcontractors, imagine that you are the QS receiving this. Now, what's
Yeah,
every piece of information you need to make the decision that you're going to pay it? This is something we find easy because we've been on main contract side. How can I give them every bit so simple, so easy, so obvious that they have no choice but to say, well, I have to pay this. It's so clear. And
definitely.
we've both seen what the standard is. We could do better. And if you want to be a very profitable subcontractor, we've seen some great examples of this done well. Welcome to your monthly commercial deep dive for subcontractors. We're the tender trainers, Ricky and Eve. We teach subcontractors everything from estimate through to final account so you can have a handle on your numbers. If you're not kind of super familiar with final accounts, it basically is your very last application that you put in as a subcontractor. The main contractor is going to assess and decide if they're going to pay it. Now, if you've had everything completely agreed, each step as you go, perfect. Your final account's just going to be your last application. Assume that they're going to pay it, they're going to sign it off, they pay you out, last certificate, and then you're done. And it's generally an actual signed off final account statement or certificate that each party signs to say, we agree that this is where the account finally ended up and we're now completing at this. It also means that you don't have opportunity in 6 or 12 months to come back and say, actually, I think we spent more than I realized. What's your tips in getting to final account in a position that makes that process easy for subcontractors?
So, from my perspective, I think there's two things I want to talk about here. One is the positions of the people who are doing the final account. I actually think there needs to be two levels of final accounts. Level one is your QSs playing in the dirt, getting the account as close as possible. Level two is the negotiators. It's important that they're different positions because there's a level of authority with that second level coming in at that point if they haven't been involved. My point number two in final accounts is just around completely understanding your numbers. How much have you spent on the job? Where is your variation account at? What do you need to get your variation account to be able to make a profit on the job? Understanding those numbers is a big leg up in terms of negotiation. You need to know your numbers.
Not just the numbers, but kind of the history.
Yeah, as you kind of alluded to, it starts at tender stage. The thing that's critical at tender stage is that scope of works needs to be very clear. When the scope of works is clear in the contract that you've signed up to, both of the parties on each side, it's clear what's a variation and what's not. Where that's not very clear, that's where you have a lot of grey areas and conflict. So the first step is to get the contract scope of works crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is, so we constantly should be agreeing the variations, setting up your final account to the end of the job. When you do that, those final account meetings should be very little to discuss.
When we have a heavy final account to negotiate, generally it's always variations, isn't it? I mean, every now and then you might have some contract scope that you're claiming main contractor saying that's not been done. You may have a main contractor who's saying this is crystal clear, this is not a variation, this was in your contract, you were supposed to do this scope. Even though you've come back and said it cost you more money, that's not really my problem. You priced the contract. And the subcontractor saying, right, but when I priced it, I couldn't have known about this scenario, or the design was changed here, leaving them in a position where they're out of pocket. And so you have these at times, it could be grey area, or there's just two parties who can't agree on it. Say you're putting your application in, and the main contractor say, I'm not paying that variation. And then each month the subcontractor keeps putting the variation in and they're like, you've got to pay it, and it's not able to be resolved. That's the type of thing that often rolls through to final account, isn't it?
Exactly. One thing I would say as a subcontractor, the client isn't necessarily right with what they say and they don't pay it. And if you stand behind your variation, you need to keep putting in your application and you need to take it all the way to final account. So
It's an interesting one because there's some tension here between the concept that we should be trying to agree as much as we can as we go.
mhm.
And also, just because the main contractor says you're not entitled to this, they may not be correct. Often they understand the contract law and what's happened through the process, design, compiling your contract better than you do. And they may be correct, but they may be using the fact that they're pretty sure you don't really 100% know to their advantage, which is part of the reason that we feel so passionately about educating subcontractors. You've got to read the contract. You have to read the contract. If they're pushing you back, figure it out. Are they right, or is it part of the game?
Build your case.
Build your case. Let's talk about how you can be ready to go into a final account meeting or submit a final account or send those emails feeling very confident in your position.
Okay, cool. We're getting into variations a bit here, but let's go. The way I look at variations is, as the subcontractor, it's your responsibility to put your case together. You need to prove it to them. Unless they've sent you an instruction and you've agreed the price and away you go with the work, you need to build your case. So for me, there's two steps to that. The first is you need to show why, in principle, this is a variation. The documentation that supports that is like, if there was a design change, you show that your contract, your tender drawing versus the updated drawing, and you can clearly see the difference. If there was a delay, you might have timesheets or a program showing the delay. If there is a change to the scope, you would be able to show what happened at tender compared to what is happening now. First, you need to prove it in principle. And second, you need to back it up with substantiation on how you got to the figures. That is proving the value. Where did you get the figures? Have you done a takeoff and it's 100 meters? Show them the takeoff.
Yeah. Why are you entitled to it contractually?
Yep.
And why are you entitled to the value things? What's the principle of why you're entitled to the extra money? And second, what's the money that you're entitled to? They may agree to for example, they might be like, yeah, you're totally entitled to this, but I don't agree with the cost that you're putting forward.
But the first battle is getting it agreed in principle.
Yeah.
If they don't agree in principle, they're not even going to look at your figures. Once you agreed in principle, then they'll be looking at the figures and you'll be agreeing the cost. But you need to get it agreed in principle.
Agreed.
So build your case.
Agreed. Although I would suggest don't wait to put the money in, do it at the same time.
No, of course not. But yeah.
Just to be clear for anyone listening, if we've got a subcontractor doing their first final account who's watching this, they may be like, what substantiation? So let's be clear.
Substantiation is your backup documents. Some examples. So if you're doing day works, you'll get paid for the time that you're going to do, right? The substantiation to that is your timesheet, where you've written down the time and hopefully got the client to agree. That would be your substantiation. Similarly, the substantiation to material costs is the invoice for those material costs. So again, for materials, you would be getting paid the cost of the materials plus your agreed percentage. How do you prove the cost of your materials? You provide the invoice. So that is substantiation. It's the backup that the client can't really say, oh, I don't agree. Like, how did you get your numbers? Well, it's clear. Here's the timesheet. Here's the invoice. Here's the takeoff.
Yeah.
Here's the drawing.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's that.
Exactly. And ideally, here's the site instruction or the email from you telling us that we have to do this work, or us telling you that we have to do it and it's going to cost extra. It's one thing that in construction we sometimes aren't strong on, which is record keeping. It's effectively the admin piece. And I think in construction, we're a lot of get up and go, let's get out and get the work done, and not necessarily like, let's make sure everything's saved into our OneDrive or SharePoint folder. Sometimes we fall down on that, and it's just in people's heads in their email accounts, especially with time pressures. Everything's program pressures. It's boring, and it never seems like the most important thing to go, I'm going to save this email into this folder, or I'm going to make sure that I note down how much of the guy's work today was on this variation and how much was on the main works. It's the stuff that makes all the difference to profitability a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
Let's quickly talk through. We are going to have the downloadable template that people can use for a final account as a best practice. But let's talk about, what does a really good final account look like? Like, what's the layout? For
me, it's not too dissimilar to an application. for payment. Obviously, application for payment has your percentages that you're applying for, right? Your final account is basically your final application with everything that's 100%, but you can take that stuff out because you're not applying for a percentage effectively. So it looks very similar to the application. It's got a clear variation schedule in it, what you're applying for, the cost, and how you got to those costs, the build-ups, the substantiation.
This is something we find easy because we've been on main contract side, but the challenge for subcontractors, a way to get into the mindset, imagine that you are the QS receiving this. Now, what's every piece of information you need to make the decision that you're going to pay it? That's ultimately what you want to do. Get into the mindset of almost making it assess itself. How can I give them every bit so simple, so easy, so obvious that they have no choice but to say, well, I have to pay this. It's so clear. And I think we could do better. We could do better subcontract side. We've both seen what the standard is. And if you want to be a very profitable subcontractor, we've seen some great examples of this done well. But the great thing about being better at your record keeping as you go and kind of trying to keep better records as you go, and each variation being like, okay, I'm going to make this assess itself. This is like ideal scenario. You're coming through to final count and they're just signing it off because everything was agreed. It's not always going to work like that. Second scenario, you get through to final account and you've got such good records. The sometimes challenging conversations that you have to have around these items, the negotiation piece, which I'd love to talk about more in a second, all of that becomes so much simpler when you've done a really good job of the admin piece and you've got all your ducks in a row. That a lot of in our communication and construction, there's a lot of frustration sometimes. It can be really argy-bargy. People are falling out with each other. We've seen that quite a lot. Part of our mission with the tender trainers and the work we do with our subcontractors is we'd like to see that on a more even ground. We'd like to see people being a little kinder to each other. We don't think of construction, QSing and final accounts and think about kindness, but we can stand our ground and be kind. We don't have to fall into disparaging remarks and being unkind. So
absolutely,
when we've got very clear information, it makes that easier.
Yeah, definitely. Doing it as you go through as well. A variation you might have found in May is much easier to remember and deal with in June than in December. People will not remember. It'll be hard to find emails and that kind of stuff. From a client's perspective, trying to pay something that no one can even remember, it's not easy.
I wanted to ask you about negotiation because I didn't realize until maybe midway through my career working for main contractors that not everyone thinks we should negotiate at final account.
Yeah.
And I now know that there's a school of thought that there should not be any negotiation, which blew my mind because I'd worked a certain way for a while. And then I kind of came across this thinking. What do you think about that?
To be honest, I think that if we're clear on our variations and what we want to get paid and we can get them agreed, there's no point for negotiations. But in my experience, to get final accounts over the line, there needs to be an element of negotiation. And there always has been. And I think it's fair. There's give and take in negotiation. And particularly when there's grey areas, negotiation gets us to where we need to be.
Yeah.
So I'm for negotiation. I would prefer not to need negotiation and everything is crystal clear cut, and it's very clear, yes, that's variation, no, that's not, and it's black and white, perfect, we don't need negotiation. But that's not the case with contracts as they are in most cases that I see in my experience. So there's too many grey areas to not be able to negotiate without going to court. So I think negotiation is best practice.
Yeah, that's the thing, because if we end up in a situation where we have to go to adjudication, the time resource alone with those types of claims is huge. And time, if you've got a QS tied up, or someone in your office tied up with that instead of, for example, tendering for the next project, it's kind of something we really want to try to avoid unless we can't help it. Sometimes you have to do it because of the scenario because you're being withheld a lot of money because it's very unfair, because you know that you most likely win, etc. But generally speaking, it's best avoided. That leaves us in a position, if we're at final account and I'm the main contractor, Ricky, and there is £60,000 between me and you at final account, and £30,000 of it for me is you've got to pay it. There's no chance this is 100% clear. £20,000 of it, I'm like, we really should get this. Like, I'm pretty confident. I think it's right. And £10,000, I'm kind of like, I can see their point a little bit. I'm not 100% sure. Then perhaps if you've offered that you're going to pay everything except the £10,000, I might accept that, right? So it kind of does depend.
Absolutely.
You want to be really clear on your costs. You don't want to negotiate below your costs unless you're in some kind of dire scenario where you absolutely have to. So what your costs are, what you're willing to accept. So when you go into final account, you know what the bottom line figure is that you can accept. And you don't necessarily want to meet in the middle. Meeting in the middle is a tactic that can happen. So let's say the difference is 10 grand and I'm like, well, look, I'll make you an offer. I'll pay half. We can meet in the middle. Depends on the circumstance. You might want to do that because it might mean that you're still making profit, happy with the final account falls, and that you think that's reasonable given the circumstance. Or you might want to push it a bit further and be like, no, I'm not going to sign that. Need to pay the full
Absolutely.
10 grand. So it's really up to the individual circumstance, I think.
Understanding your numbers was one of my first points in preparation for negotiation, because when you go into that meeting, do you need that 10 grand to break even? It changes the position that you're going to be negotiating, doesn't it? So I always go into final account meetings knowing what I need to get my variation account to have a successful final account. So I know I need to get my variation account to 100 grand and they've approved 80. I know that I need to get it above 20. I think that's super critical to be very clear on your numbers like that when you're going into these meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. And not lose the complete picture because you've got caught up in the detail. I have one more thing to bring, which is slightly controversial, maybe. I put a post on LinkedIn and I said, don't forget to include something that you can negotiate on. Don't forget to include an extra variation that allows you some negotiating space. It led to some interesting conversations and some interesting questioning of myself about how do I feel about that? Because if you know that, say, your final account is at 80 grand and you need to have it at 90 and there's 10 grand that you can afford to lose, if you are working for a main contractor who always negotiates, who never pays the full final account, is always knocking variations, and you only ever put in the variations that you are 110% entitled to for the exact amount that the variation was, what position does that leave you in? And it's an interesting question because I would rather work in an industry where we only ever put in what we're totally entitled for and the main contractor always pays it, but it's not really the reality. So what do you think about that?
My thoughts are, I think you're the same anyhow, Eve. But yes, I do agree. If it's not a variation, you don't put it in just because. There has to be an argument behind it. But I do believe in presenting cases for things like, one, there's a scope element that we may have missed and it's cost us extra money. Even if it is a grey area, I think you should put it forward because it has cost you money and it can be a negotiation piece. There are going to be variations that are grey area, not black and white. I think you should be putting them forward for similar reasons. Now, those variations might be 50-50 chance in paying or even less, but in my opinion, you still put them forward. They are still, you have a case behind them. You've built your case, you still have a case behind them, and you will be talking about them in negotiations.
Yeah.
I personally think put things forward if it's cost you money, even if it's grey area. It's cost you money.
I agree.
Money, right?
I agree.
And
we're here running businesses, employing people.
Exactly.
We're in a circumstance where the main contractor puts the contracts together, where they have a lot more knowledge and information. They have a lot more professionals on their team. It's easy to get a little bit tripped up. And if you're going, I'm going to be super, okay, this is grey area, so I won't put this in. And what's the wider impact of that if you're not making profit on your projects and you can't continue to trade forever? I think where I fall with it is, for example, a good grey area is that the scope says one thing and your bill of quantity, your price that's in the contract kind of says something different. And then the
Yeah.
main contractor is going to say, well, you signed this contract, so you agreed to the scope. And you're going to say, but look at my price list. The spec that I've listed out is different because that's what you told me 6 months
Yeah.
ago when we first started pricing. That's a really common type of grey area, right? And I would be fighting that corner because,
I
especially
would
if they
as
haven't
well.
specifically come to you and said the spec has changed, I'd be like, well, you're professionals and you've put this in your contract with the spec different and it's a
Yeah.
grey area. You might not get that. But again, it's something that could go to final account and maybe you end up getting half, maybe you end up getting 75%. Maybe they'll end up thinking, actually, this is a bit unfair and you might get it paid out. It costs you money and you're running a business
Yeah.
and you're employing people. You've got to stand firm on some of these things and realize that we are in a situation that is not equal. It's not equally weighted between main contractors and subcontractors.
Yeah.
To fight your corner is important.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking from a client perspective, which even I've worked client side, I've had those variations put forward to me where we contractually, as the client, believe that there's no case. Subcontractor puts it forward, we don't pay it, it gets taken to final account. In negotiations, they've proved that they've spent money outside of the CSA, outside of the costs. So we have agreed to pay part to help the subcontractor. So it does happen in some cases where a good client will say, okay, I can see that wasn't allowed for. I can see that you've spent money on it. I am going to help you out. So there are good clients that do that.
Yeah.
There are obviously clients that don't, but either way, you should be putting your case forward
Yeah.
in talking about it in the final account meetings.
Yeah, because there's a case for the ethical variation. Sometimes there's a
Exactly.
case for, okay, contractually we're not entitled, but I'm still going to ask you because this doesn't seem right, seem
For sure.
fair. So this is money that has actually cost me to do these works for you.
Yeah,
And this
absolutely.
thing between us, I'm still going
The
to put in
ethic,
for it.
the main contractors do the wrong thing sometimes, and I have seen many cases where there's an ethical case behind a variation,
Yeah.
and you should 100%, even if contractually it doesn't stick, you should be putting forward an ethical case like that.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, that kind of ties into the case for getting to final account and needing to negotiate some things, which is if you're only ever
Yeah,
putting in what you're 100% entitled to, and if they say you're not entitled to it, you take it out of your account, you're going to have nothing to talk about at final account stage, and that's fine. Or if you can come to an agreement at every application, that's awesome, fantastic. But sometimes you're going to have grey areas, and those are the most likely, in my experience, to roll
yeah,
through and end up in a kind of
yeah.
negotiation where you meet on it.
It's pretty simple, isn't it? You will lean towards one side and the client will lean towards the other side in that grey area. The grey area ones are always going to be the points of difference, basically.
All right, tales from final accounts. What's some good, bad, ugly, and different experiences that you've had working on final accounts?
um, Most interesting working on client side, coming to a new job, the new QS, taking over a package close to final account, and the account on a £4 million package is £1 million difference. So
Wow.
having to do a lot of work to close that £1 million gap. That's probably one of my worst case scenarios. To be fair to the subcontractor, we worked really well together and we closed the gap. We got the account closed.
Nice.
We did it. It wasn't easy, but we worked together and did it. But it wasn't fun. The best final accounts for me have been where we've done interim final accounts and mark that on the way through. You have one final account meeting, talk about one or two variations. You go, yep, I'll pay that, but we're not paying that. Agreed. And it's done. So it's basically like not combative at all.
Mm-hmm.
I think my main point around this is like, even with the bad final account that I did, collaboration is always makes this stuff easier.
Mm-hmm.
I know that client side, they're not always collaborative, but when you can work collaboratively with opposing roles, I think you're just happier and things are easier and It's more enjoyable, isn't it?
I agree completely. I'm always very open that I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the industry. The love is a lot of the work that we do. We go in and we literally build buildings, we create spaces, we create homes for people, we come together, there's banter, like there's so much good in construction. But the hate part is the what can happen within relationships around things like disputes. And a lot of the things I've had to work with as a quantity surveyor can be really uncomfortable. So I completely agree. It's all about how collaborative you can be. I remember one of my favorite final account meetings. It was so simple. We had been pretty good at agreeing variations as we went, but there was still a maybe £30,000 difference between us. He sent over a good final account, a record before we sat down with all of the information. So all the substantiation was there. It was a roofing contractor. We sat down together and looked at it. Looking at the substantiation that he put together, I was able to say, okay, yeah, I do actually agree with that one. I'm going to pay it. I do actually agree with this one. I don't agree with this one. I can't pay it. I just don't think that you're fully entitled to it. And he said, do you want to split it? And I said, okay, it was maybe £3,000 or something like that. And then that's what we did. We split it. And it was just so simple for us to get through to that final place. And I think the meeting may be been like 20 minutes or something. And then we kind of I sent him the cert to sign off and it was just job done. I remember thinking to myself, he came ready to negotiate and that's what made it easy. The worst final account situations I've had have been where there's a lot of changes and very little records. So it's things like dry lining accounts, painting accounts, things that happen at fit out stage when you may have a lot of changes happening with fit out when the dry lining's up and then you have to chase this cable, check this, go back in for this. There's always a lot happening with the electrical works and walls being open, sometimes with the plumbing. All those little changes, like we've got 30 days of extra painting or whatever. And I'm like, but show me where and when and how this happened. No one was talking to me about it at the time. And now suddenly I've got loads of day works accounts and you can't seem to be able to prove that this was work that you were actually doing extra as opposed to just completing your role on site and completing the works on site. And that's when it gets really uncomfortable. So that's where that really good record keeping and also I think keeping the QS in the loop as you go. It's all well and good that the project manager or site manager has told you to crack on and do this extra thing. But if your QS doesn't know about it, then there may be a bit of a shock coming, you know. All right. So that concludes our final accounts chat. Until next time, if you've got something you're really keen for us to talk about, please drop us a message. Ciao.